Welcome to Her Legal Global. I'm your host, Faye Gelb, and today we're welcoming Rafeena Bacchus, who is here to talk to us about pivoting our legal careers. I just want to tell you a little bit about Rafeena because she comes to us with a wide variety of experiences, and that's what she's using as she pivots into a new legal career. So Rafeena has over 15 years of civil litigation experience, and her career has been balanced between acting on behalf of insurance companies and working on behalf of the underrepresented in the fields of human rights and social justice. In addition to her legal work, she is passionate about mindfulness and yoga and is a certified yoga teacher. I'm telling you a little bit about her background because I think it's very important to realize that when we pivot in our legal careers, we're bringing all of us to the table. All of us is a very important component. So that includes things that you might not think of actually bringing along for the journey. So she's going to be sharing with us today her tips as she moves from her legal practice into a mediation practice. So I just want to welcome you, Rafeena. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Faye. Thank you for hosting this event. I'm really excited to be here today.
It's wonderful to have you. And I'm really excited about learning more about this particular, journey that you've been on. So just tell us a little bit about why did you start to pivot at this stage of your career? You've been practicing for 15 years. What is it that either gave you the courage or gave you the shove to do what you're doing right now?
Well, I think there are a number of different reasons, and they all came together to lead me to the direction that I'm going in. So it wasn't just one thing that led me there. And I think that's something to take into account when you're thinking about pivoting your career. It's being open to all of the different information that's coming to you from different sources, and being open to different possibilities to put you into a direction that you need to go in. So I've been practicing insurance defense for most of my career, and I was at a great firm, but the pandemic hit. And I was at a stage where I thought I'd really like to do something that feels like it really aligns with who I am as a person, where I feel like I'm giving back to the world as well as using my legal skills. I didn't want to give up on the 15 years investment of being a lawyer because I think that I'm a good lawyer. I understand how the insurance industries work. I understand how I've put so much time and investment into becoming who I am. But at the same time, I thought I'd like to do more. I'd like to bring my whole self to work. And the pandemic is really what gave me that push to take that step of faith and be courageous and believe in myself and transition towards the mediation practice. So what happened is actually I had a mediation with a mediator that I knew as a lawyer, and we settled the case. And after the mediation, she called me and she said, "Your opening was great. It didn't feel like a lawyer's opening. It felt like a mediator's opening." And I said, "Yeah, I've done a lot of work outside of just being a lawyer. I'm into the yoga. I'm into meditation. I've done a lot of reading, and I just see this a bit more holistically." And she said, "You should consider being a mediator." I said, "Wow, it's something I've always thought about wanting to do someday down the road. But would I ever be brave enough to step into that role?" And with that simple conversation, it turned my mind to that direction. And from there, things just picked up. And I started planning and putting strategic steps in place to be where I am today, which is starting my own practice and, having had the training in the mediation.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it was a combination of finding your courage and also the events around you and a comment from somebody else that really gave you the impetus to do this. So I think when people are looking at what does it take to even begin the pivoting process, we need to really look inside ourselves and say, I don't necessarily want to be where I am, but in taking your journey into consideration, it's also, I don't necessarily want to leave behind all that work that I've done to get to this point. So how can I combine them? Where are my strengths? What can I take and bring to the table? So let's just talk about assessing your skills and your traits as we go forward. You had to do that as part of this process. So what did you look at?
So what I looked at is I spoke to various mediators. So I made it a personal goal of mine to speak to at least one mediator a week. And I thought by speaking to the mediators, I would get some insight into what are the pros and cons of being a mediator, what are some of their skills that they had, their personality traits, as well as some of the administrative tasks behind the scenes. And in speaking to them, certain qualities that they had, I saw really stood out. And I realized that these are qualities that I have as well. And so I didn't want to jump into an area without knowing that I was going to be a good fit for that. So it's more than just about your skills, it's about the fit, which I guess is a combination of the skills, but it was, do I have the personality traits as well? So I sat down and I made a list of some of the key skills that I thought were really important to being a mediator. And I feel that I do have those skills. So they were, you know, trustworthiness, humility with confident strength. There's a static, it's repeating the sound right now.
Turn off everything else that you have on.
Okay. Yeah.
Because you might have something open that's in terms of LinkedIn, you will get a feedback from that. So you were talking about trustworthiness and humble. I think a mediator has to also be principled and ethical. What else would you say?
So the non-judgmental, patient and tenacious, empathetic is huge, and logical and rational. So I see it as this this connection between the mind and the heart, and being able to put those two together and come up with creative solutions for our clients, for the two lawyers that are trying to get a solution here. So it's really about, you know, without sounding cliche, like a little bit of that out of the box thinking to come up with these creative solutions that takes into account, you know, the mind and heart of the situation.
I think that's really something that we should look at as well when we're pivoting within law and staying within a legal career path. So choosing another type of law would, I think, have the same sort of assessment necessary. We need to know if we're a good fit for that area rather than just choosing it based on, well, it sounds like it would be interesting, or I know a couple of people, or I've done a couple of cases. I think what you've done here is really insightful and an excellent foundation for moving ahead, because you are bringing your entire personality and your skill set into this position. So where are you going from doing the assessment of your skills and your traits? What area of specialty are you going to stay in? The insurance related area of mediation? What are you doing there?
Yeah, so that's I've as a lawyer, I've been involved in thousands of cases in the insurance field. So that would be the natural progression for me. So that's the other thing. I'm pivoting, but I'm not making this huge jump in terms of, I'm staying in my lane in a way, right? Because this is a natural progression. I know this area of law, and having done these mediations as a lawyer, it's almost like a parallel move to become a mediator. I've also done the human rights and social justice work for 3 years with community legal clinics. So in addition to that, I would be also open to taking on the human rights types of mediations, and there are a lot of those. But the main area that I'm going to focus on is going to be the insurance and the personal injury.
What would you say that would be a recommended any more recommended actions that you can take as you go into this? We've talked a bit about, you know, meeting with mediators, learning a bit more about them, talking about them. What about a mentor or tapping into your own network? What would you do there?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to learn to receive, is the way I put it, because we've talked about this before, Faye, especially as being a first generation lawyer. We're not really, I wasn't really used to getting that mentorship and support throughout my career from other people that were similar to me, because I was the first one doing it. And so you're kind of like, I've got to do this on my own. That's the mentality. I've got to figure this out on my own. And I've realized over my career that just doesn't work. We're part of a community. We're part of a social network, and learning to receive was a huge part of it. And what I mean by that is exactly what you said, reaching out to people and talking to them, different mediators, and trying to enlist them as a mentor. So I never actually asked them to be a mentor. They offered to mentor me after talking to each other, and I ended up getting 2 really incredible mentors. And And also in terms of my network, putting myself out there and saying, hey, listen, I'm going to put myself out there as a mediator. Will you hire me? And I think that's really interesting because it's this balancing act of receiving that from them and being open to that help, right? And knowing when not to force it. So not everybody is going to be your tribe, right? So there might be some people that are just too busy and they're not able to be your mentor. Know when to back off and who to take that information from as well. So that has been a really tremendously huge part of the journey for me, and learning how to, work with my network and the mentorship component.
I just want to dive down a little deeper into that because you talk about being a first generation lawyer. I know that you also worked in a jurisdiction that was quite small, PEI. So just tell us a little bit about your background because I think that's very instructive to people who are thinking of pivoting, that they need to know that the people that make these courageous moves don't necessarily have everything lined up all the way through their career. They've had to do a lot of leaps, take some courageous steps. So tell us a little bit about what that journey was like for you.
Yeah, sure. I would love to. So I went to law school at Dalhousie, and when I was there, I got a position in Prince Edward Island, which was like my dream position. I got hired by the Chief Justice of their Supreme Court there. They call it the Supreme Court, to be the law clerk for the Chief Justice. And when I tried to start working, like you had to, sign up to go into PI, and the Prince Edward Island Bar Association, they wouldn't allow me to article there. And the reason was that I didn't have all the prerequisite courses that I needed to get into Prince Edward Island. So the static is still going a little bit, but so basically what that meant was there was like a bit of a mobility issue in terms of them not wanting people who hadn't taken the courses since first year, all of those optional courses, to get into their province to practice. The only way you would have gotten into that province to practice is if you knew you were from the island and every single course you selected throughout all of law school was to make sure you got in there. So I spoke to the dean of the law school about it, and we were like, maybe we should bring a charter application based on mobility. Maybe we should just go up against them, bring litigation. And I'm like, no, I just want to work there, right? So let's figure this out. So what we decided to do was that in addition to my full course load that I had, I wrote the exams for these additional optional courses so that I would get the credits. So in addition to my course load, I also did the extra. There were about 4 other courses where I had to write those exams.
Wow, that's a big challenge. And you were able to overcome that and go on to do your articling?
Yeah, so I went on and I did my articling, and then I was recognized as the first woman of color called to the bar there. And, some people will say, well, what's the big deal? I mean, you got called to the bar. It's just a coincidence that you're a woman of color. Maybe, but the big deal is the courses that I had to take and all those hurdles that I had to overcome to get into that province to article there. So it's the creative solutions, right? And yeah.
So I see that you bring that to what you're going to be doing in your mindset. What do you think gets in the way for people when they're about to pivot? What was holding you back at that before you made this leap?
Well, definitely the biggest factor is fear. Fear of failure, fear of not getting enough clients, the insecurity part of it. If you're in a firm and you have a steady income coming in, you're secure. It feels safe.
Definitely.
Right? But then if you want to be your full self and fully go in the court, you've got to put a bit of skin in the game, as they say. And that's where the courage comes in, and the courage to believe in yourself and have faith in yourself.
So let's just talk a little bit about the setup of how you've gone about this, because once we've made that mental mind shift and we're going to be going forward, we've set ourselves up with our mentors, our network, and we're going to be making the move to go forward in our mind. Plus, now we have to get all set up. So what are we going to do there? What would we need to set up in your mind? And what steps did you take?
Yeah, so that's probably another area where I think there's a bit of a barrier for people, because it's so overwhelming to think about everything that we need to do to set up a practice, as well as doing it on our own. So I'm not only practicing as a mediator, I'm still practicing as a lawyer right now. So I've brought over some files with me because I need to continue working as a lawyer to bring some income in while I'm building up the mediation practice. And, you know, we'll see how that works out in terms of, I might end up doing a bit more legal work, a bit more mediation work. So when it comes to setting up the infrastructure, it can be a little bit intimidating. And that's where you've got to face the fear, kind of lean into it and do the research to find out, how did other people set this up? Right? And what is going to work for me in this situation? How
So
much
did you do that?
invest?
Did you do that? Did you do your research in terms of like looking at what you were going to need ahead of time?
I did. Yeah, I did. Part of it is, I think part of this too is about, again, you know, you're not going to be perfect. If you're aiming to have everything set up perfectly, you're never going to do it probably, right? Because there's never the perfect time. But that, again, doesn't mean like completely throw caution at the wind and not plan at all. So what I did was I researched, you know, like different software companies that I would need in terms of, you know, the time tracking systems, the law society fees. I incorporated, I got, you know, the computers, all the systems in place, so that I'm able to practice and to set up the mediation business.
So a mediation practice, though, is a little bit simpler than something perhaps when you're practicing in a different area of law. You talked about that beforehand with me, and it's basically you're streamlining it. You still have the infrastructure, but it's not overwhelming. So I think people that are pivoting into another area of law need to take that into consideration, that there is going to be more of an infrastructure. I did like also your point about you were bringing your files with you, your book of business. And I think that's a really important aspect for people to consider when they're making this move, is to ensure that you have some sort of income that you are taking with you. I think that takes away a lot of the insecurity and the fear, to be able to know that you're going to have at least some sort of steady income to make that bridge. So how did you end up with assessing your costs? What did you do there in terms of the investment that you needed to make? What did you do about it?
Well, I wanted to make sure that I had enough income to last me. If I didn't, enough savings to last me if I didn't have any income coming in for about 6 months. And then I also calculated what the new expenses were going to be associated with setting up this practice. And the mediation practice is very, very low in terms of costs, right? Because you're able to go to a boardroom, so you don't necessarily need an office. You don't necessarily need an assistant to start off with. You're basically getting the mediation briefs a couple days, hopefully 7 days before the mediation, reviewing them and going in and mediating and then leaving. So that's another reason it's a great area to transition into, right? Because it's low cost, right? But on the flip side of that, you do want to make sure that you've got the network so that you've got the mediations coming in, as well as the background in that area that you're mediating.
So how did you come up with setting your rate for your mediations? Because I know some people might have a bit of a barrier there as well, in terms of like, how do I set my fees? What did you take
Yeah.
into consideration?
Yeah, so that's actually something it takes a lot more thought than you would originally think about, because it's this area where you don't want to undervalue yourself or, you know, go too high and then cut people out. So again, when I was talking to different mediators, some of them were saying to put my rate right up there because I've got the experience, whereas others were saying, no, you've got to start at the bottom because you're just starting at the bottom as a mediator. So my rate is a bit on the lower end of the spectrum, and that's because I agree I am starting as a mediator. Even though I've got all these years of legal experience, I've also have to acknowledge that I'm coming into this as a mediator fresh. And I'd like to make the mediation services accessible to other people, so the human rights realm as well, not like, you know, as a barrier where people can't afford the mediations. So the interesting thing about mediation is you can set your rate at whatever you want. So there's some mediators whose rates are like $8,000 for a day. And then at the lowest end of the spectrum is the $600 per half an hour. I mean, per half a day. So Yeah, so part of it as well was trying to figure out approximately how many mediations do I expect to have this year, right? And then figuring out the numbers of how much I need to have a sustainable income over the year. So there's a little bit of math there, a little bit of an Excel worksheet. I have a lawyer, so I spoke to my lawyer. An accountant. So I spoke to my accountant about the numbers as well. So that's definitely a factor to consider when you're making this pivot. You can't ignore the money side of things.
Definitely, yeah, definitely not. So let's just talk a bit about the business model that you're going to be having now. You incorporated, you have your own corporation. How are you setting it up? So you talked about you don't necessarily need a virtual assistant or an assistant at this point. What is the structure that you thought would be the best to ease your way into this practice?
Right. So I looked at different structures, and one of the possibilities was to stay on at the firm and mediate part-time while at the firm. So continue the defense work and mediate. And I've seen a few lawyers do that. Some colleagues have done that. But for me, I felt like that just wasn't the right fit right now because I didn't want to be distracted with the defense work and not focus on the mediation work. So for me, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go all in and I'm going to do this as a mediation practice. And so some people I've seen, they did that as well, where they just set up a sole mediation business. But in that case, they already had they had already been mediating for a while when they did that. I haven't been. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a little bit of a hybrid approach here in terms of continuing to have it as a law firm with the select clients that I'm bringing on board and those that I might sign up, as well as the mediation practice. So that's the structure that I have right now.
So let's just talk a little bit about the training that you might need to go into this. I understand that mediators don't have to have any official training. What did you choose to do in that regard?
Yeah, so it's not mandated that you have training, but it's definitely recommended to do some training. And there are a lot of different courses out there, and that part is something that you're going to have to think about and look into. What is it that works for you? So there's the Harvard course.
Sounds prestigious.
Yeah, so it sounds prestigious because then you get the Harvard under your name.
Always good.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And you get to spend a week out there too. So that's quite appealing. But during COVID times, that wasn't really as appealing to me. And being a Canadian, I wanted to support the Canadians. So I did the University of Windsor course with Stickfeld Handy. And they've been around for quite some time. And so their workshops are not geared only to lawyers. They're geared to anybody who's interested in alternative dispute resolution. Osgood has a master's program as well. So there are lots of books, there are lots of articles about it. There is a alternative dispute institution, and you can get certified as a qualified mediator as well if you've got a certain number of mediations under your belt and a lot of training. So it's interesting because not everybody who mediates, and some very successful mediators do not have these additional qualifications or training because they have so much experience being on the job, right, with mediating and with as being a lawyer. But I would recommend doing at least some training, right, so that you go in there and it boosts your confidence as well while you're mediating.
I think that's a really important point for anybody who's pivoting is to determine whether or not you want to get additional training. I know we're all given that lawyer title when we leave law school, but if we haven't practiced in an area for eons or ever, it might make it worthwhile for us to get that additional training, to go and seek out some more courses to get ourselves up to speed, especially when there's been some major changes in legislation and that type of thing in certain areas. Like I know, for example, family law and wills in BC has had major changes just recently. So that type of thing I think is very important when you're assessing a pivot area. I also wanted to just go back into one of the comments that you made earlier about it's not going to be perfect. So I think that's a really important point when we're moving forward with something like this is to expect the unexpected. And what are your thoughts on that?
That really helps me to know that things aren't always going to go smoothly because When things don't go smoothly, I'm like, okay, this is just part of the process. Breathe into it, face it, work through it, and move on. It doesn't mean that the whole thing is a wash. It's part of it. And I think that's just a massive understanding to have, because if, mediation gets canceled or something just didn't go ahead the way I thought it would, I'm okay with it. And then I'm ready. It makes my mind more flexible and ready to deal with a way to move forward.
What about decisions and making your decisions? Because now you're combining your practice with a mediation practice. What about overcommitting and being able to balance both of these adequately? What are your thoughts there?
I think that that's huge for me, because um, there are a lot of things coming at me at once right now, in terms of, like, with the practicing the law, there's a client who wants me to work with them in an area of law that I'm not that familiar with. And I'm starting out my practice, and it's tempting to say, yes, come on, all the business come in through the door. But realistically, I want to focus on the mediations. And so I have to prioritize. Do I want to spend my time learning this new area of law, or do I want to actually focus on the mediations, which was my first priority? And it's tough, right? Because you sort of want to say, yeah, I can do it all. Just come on. But at the end of the day, I want to do it well as well, right? And so it's about just making sure you know what your priorities are and what you really want to achieve out of this. I think that's really important. Yeah.
I think another important point as well, right along with what you're saying, is every yes to something is a no to something else, because we only have so much time. So I can see that in making this transition, we're going to have to be very diligent about prioritizing what our new priorities are, not our old priorities. And that's a very big switch, I think, for some people to make. I know I would have difficulty doing that. So that's amazing. And what about, I know that you've been very involved in both your career and in your personal life in giving back. So just let's talk a little bit about that, in how you see yourself going forward with this mediation practice and how it's going to relate to that key value that you have of being involved in giving back.
Oh yeah. So I actually have an example about that. So one of my mentors, he's been giving so much in terms of the inside scoop on mediations, shadowing him. If he's at a mediation and he thinks there's something that might be beneficial to me, he'll message me and say, call me. Hey, listen, this just happened. I want you to know about this. And the whole time I'm thinking, how can I give back, right? Even in this situation. And when our mind is kind of thinking in that direction, things come to us. And he had mentioned to me off the cuff that his daughter had just graduated from law school, and she had just started at a new firm. And that's all he said about it. And, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I know that firm. I know the lawyers at that firm. So I sent him an email and I said, hey, listen, if she ever wants to talk to me, 100% confidential, I realize she has you, but I'm open to being a mentor to her. And she was so grateful for that. And so that's just a small example of how we can give back, right? It's by mentoring other lawyers as they're coming up. And in terms of the mediation practice, it would be doing pro bono mediations, volunteering at, there are some community mediation clinics downtown. So volunteering as a mediator in those clinics and giving back in that way, as well as mentoring anyone that's looking to pivot or get into the mediation business. I would be open to doing that.
Okay, so I just want to sum up now, everybody, what we were talking about, and that was the 9 pivoting steps that we were having to pivot our career. So it's to know your skill set and determine your area of specialty, obtain any necessary training before you pivot, learn to receive assistance. And that was a very important one that Rafeena really emphasized here, was being able to receive from other people. Determine your investment in how much you're going to need. Financials are very important to give you peace of mind. Determine how you want to set up your business. And we talked a little bit about Rafeena's values and how they are a key point of what she's doing here. Be prepared for hiccups, and that's a big one. We're not taking perfectionism along with us. It's expected that this journey is not going to be completely smooth, and it's okay if everything doesn't work out perfectly. Use this as an opportunity to set how and where you will use your time, so your priorities, because we saw very clearly here that prioritizing your new practice is very important over older work. And use it as an opportunity to give back into the community. So, Rafeena, I'm just inviting you to tell people how they can get in contact with you with your mediation practice.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Faye. The best way to get in contact with me would be via email. The email address is info@bacchuslegal.ca. And then Faye also has the link to my website just below. And so that's bacchuslegal.ca.
And your mediation calendar if people want to book a mediation. I want to thank you very much today for coming on Her Legal Global, empowering us through skills and shared wisdom. Thank you very much, Rafeena.
Thanks, Faye. Have a good day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.